Hey, travelers, it's Sparks Valentine here with
Erica Nerdy Yogi.
and
And Foxfires.
and welcome to Dice and Dish, the tabletop RPG roundtable discussion podcast, where the three of us are going along on travels, talking about three different topics every episode, and meet some interesting adventures along the way that we bring into our silly discussions. So we really hope that you enjoy the episode and that you continue along the travel with us. So I guess we'll see you along the road. All right, Erica, roll the dice.
It's Foxfire.
Of course, it's Foxfire. So, hardcore and survival elements in TTRPGs. How do you feel about it? So, for me, they can be fun, but as you guys already know, I don't prefer hard games. I don't prefer to feel like I'm going to die. So, hardcore doesn't typically vibe with me. I've played in a campaign that was a 5e that did do some hardcore rules. You got 1 HP on a long rest, you had to eat, you had to sleep, and you had to find a safe place. And it was fairly brutal. What are your guys' thoughts on survival and hardcore elements in TTRPGs?
I think it just depends on the group. I think some people enjoy that. I think some people don't. And I also think it just depends on the system that you're playing because like tracking your arrows and stuff like that. I feel like some people do that in 5e, some people don't. I know that when I run game, I prefer if people do that, just because, if the wizard has to track how much ink and paper they have, then you should have to track how much ammunition you have. But I know some people don't look at it that way. For something like DCC, you only get 1 HP back just naturally. That's more of like an OSR kind of style thing. For healing, that is something that we changed when we started doing a mega dungeon. We didn't change. We ran Crypt of the Devil Lich raw. Rules as written, if you're not familiar with that, like, whole thing. And so it was brutal. I mean, they were going in there. I don't want to say the first thing that you run into, but the first thing that you run into, it really messed them up. I think they made it to like maybe 8 rooms on the first level. They never made it to the second level of the dungeon. And they just kind of were like, this is impossible doing it 1 HP heals at a time.
Apologies, our guest just came home.
Oh.
And James needs to protect the house from our guest.
You just be a good boy, James.
You know what, James? Come here.
We got a kitty cat.
You got a haircut, so let's show it off.
Oh, look at and that's all the animals. Animal cam. Oh, they give each other love.
Yes, I just got home from work a bit ago, and every time I come home, they have to swarm me. They prefer me.
Shots fired.
It's true.
No.
I give treats.
Yeah, we with Stonehill, which is what we're doing now, which is Mega Dungeon. It's made for Labyrinth Lord, but I'm using DCC. We're doing a hit dice a night when you rest, but I mean, I make them track their food and everything. I feel like when you're doing, I feel like resource management is important. I know some people don't think it is, but if you're not playing in, I feel like if you're playing in a city, then you shouldn't really worry about like tracking your food because there's plenty of food that you could just be like, yeah, we stop and grab it in a tavern or when we're go to the market, whatever, fill in blank, it's readily available. But if you're doing a mega dungeon, it's a different story. What do you think, Sparks?
I feel like it really depends on the system that you're going to be playing in. Some systems are maybe geared a little bit more towards kind of your hardcore survival elements. I mean, like you were talking about, like, I mean, DCC. I feel like those are maybe geared a little bit towards, like, the OSRs are geared more towards that. But I mean, obviously, with tabletop games in general, you can kind of pick and choose what you want to use and kind of just throw them in and, you know, play with as it is, people at your table. I know for our Dragonheim 5e game, we added in, we're not doing any resurrections. We're doing one death save instead of the like normal 3. So if you go down and you get the death save and you fail it, that's it. It's over. So I do tracking arrows and like kind of that situation. I feel like it's kind of the same as what you said, Erica. If you're in a town, you're not really gonna have to like really worry about that, because it's like, oh, well, I can go and stop by with like food and everything. Arrows is maybe a little bit of a different story, but kind of with like your food and things like that, if you're in a city, you wouldn't have to worry about it, because it's like, oh, well, we, you know, went and got this or whatever. But if you are traveling out somewhere where like stuff like that is not readily available, I do feel like it should be tracked. I don't know. I think it just depends on A, what system you're going to be playing, B, the DM, what is their idea of a hardcore survival elements in a game, and then C, just the people that you're going to be playing with and the people at the table. I think those are like important things to kind of look at and understand. But that is also just me, like my kind of like thought process behind like games that are going to be like that.
I agree with both of y'all, and that's how I'm actually running the game I am right now. If they're somewhere where I feel like they can reasonably get food, I do not mention about tracking it or anything. But if they're in a place where food is not easy to come by, as an example, a while back, I had them in an area where literally everything was dead. The plants were dead, there were skeletons, it was a desert. They had nothing, they had access to nothing is what I really mean. And they were reliant upon their rations and what they had with them.
Well, you're talking about survival elements. I'm tempted to mention weather, because, you know, survival can be affected by extreme weather. You know, if you, depending on where you're playing at and in the world, if it's extreme cold, if you go to a different plane of existence and you're somewhere like on the fire plane, or you go to the Shadowfell, if you go to the plane of salt, if you're playing in 5e, that sucks the hydration out of you, like all of those are survival elements that you can play with your players to make, you know, the monsters might not be that dangerous, but the terrain is going to kill you if you're not prepared for it, if you don't do the research for it, stuff like that. And that's something that like you could turn into a whole mini quest or little mission for them. They know they're going to the fire plane. Okay, cool. We need to get some gear that's going to be able, or consumables that aren't just like, you know, fire resistant potions, like make it into something kind of fun. Or, you know, if somebody's studying alchemy, then they know, okay, well, we need this list of ingredients, and I could brew this many fire potion, you know, resistant stuff. And, you know, it's something that you could play with, not just like arrows and stuff. Weather could be something as well.
Yeah, agree with you. All right, James, you're going back down.
Yeah, I do feel like whenever you were talking about like hit points and everything on a rest, like you get 1 hit point back, it kind of also begs into question, like, if the DM is going to run it that way, what are you going to do about the things that don't really sleep for a full 8 hours. So you have like elves that trance, you have some things that don't even need sleep. They just go into an inactive state. They don't need like food and everything. And kind of begs to question like, do you just not allow those races in? Or is it
Those races don't exist in DCC. That's how you get around that. Like
Yes.
for 1 HP.
for
Like
one the system? Yeah.
yeah, so like stuff like that's very much a 5e thing. Like in DCC, elves do not go into like that kind of situation.
Yeah.
They sleep like everybody else. It's very much like I can't speak for Pathfinder, but I can speak for DCC and even Shadow Dark. It's not, but Shadow Dark you have to have you have to actively eat. That's part of it, and
To
you have to have
heal,
a
yeah.
fire. But for DCC, there is no races that are like, and I will say this: there's no races in the core rule book that are that way, that are like undead in that nature, because it is just your general core races from back in the day.
And I feel like most systems, and I could be wrong, correct me if I am, most systems who have built-in survival elements like that do not have races that circumvent those elements, or at least not to the extent that 5e does. With that being said, 5e is a very much power players game. It is designed to be easy for the players to get into and have fun with. And so there are races that circumvent it. There are races like Warforged and Reborn that don't need to eat. They don't need to sleep. They don't even need to breathe.
Yeah.
And that's fine because while 5e has rations and things like that that you're supposed to be using, most 5e games, or at least most of the ones that I've been in, don't actually use those mechanics. I've only been in a couple that did, and only one that was really hardcore with it. Now, what that campaign did for elves in particular, we didn't have any reborns or warforged. But in that campaign, the elves got 2 HP back because the other party members were a Triton, a half elf that does still have to sleep for 8 hours, and both of those races had to sleep for 8 hours. So the 2 elves that were in the party, they just got 2 hit points back versus the 1. And that was how the DM balanced it out. It's like, okay, you don't have to sleep. You're still going to have to wait for 8 hours, so
Might as well.
yeah.
Get
Because
extra rested.
I know that y'all like in our Dragonheim game, we have we have 2. We only have 2 characters that actually need an ARR rest, right? It's mine, Spurgeon's.
Yeah.
Everybody
so.
else, like, I mean, so it's kind of the thing that I was thinking about when y'all were talking about it. Like, so say if you do have a group of players who all chose races that don't need an 8 hours of sleep in order to get a full night's rest, right? Because they don't rest. So you just never sleep. You just keep playing all the time.
So it depends on the individual race. So if it's a party of elves, then theoretically they would just all have to take a 4-hour trance.
Yeah.
Like like you said, like the Reborn that never, or
Yes.
Warforged. It's just those 2.
So
Like
the thing is with the Reborn and the Warforged, while they don't have to sleep and they don't have to eat or breathe, they do have to rest.
In
It
an
is built
inactive state, yeah.
okay.
It is built into their character that, or even another example would be the Warlock Pact of the Moon. They don't have to sleep either, but they still have to have 8 hours of little to no activity.
Okay.
And that's written into
I think the Dampmere is like that too.
I believe all undead things are. So the Damnfire, I believe, is like that. The Reborn, the Warforged, and the Warlock, again, the Pact of the Moon ability. I don't think it's actually Pact of the Moon. I think I am misquoting the name. But either way, all of them are similar in that they don't require sleep, but they do require a period of inactivity or little to no activity. So, as an example, I played a warlock that took that aspect of the moon, and I did that so she would not have to sleep
I think it's
and would be
Pact of
able
the
to do something
Tome.
else.
And I think
It
it's an
may
Eldritch Invocation.
so you get it from Pact of the
Maybe?
Tome, and it's like aspect of the moon or something like that.
Yeah, I was like, because I know that only 3 is the Pact of the Chain, the Tome, and then
So
the
you
Blade. I think Talisman. Pact of the Talisman is also one as well.
Yes, and you get it through the tome. Again, I figured I misquoted the Pact of the Moon, but you get it through the tome one, and it's like level 5. You hit that, you don't have to sleep, if memory serves. I took that so my character would not have to sleep anywhere. For one, she had a major fear of going to sleep because stuff always seemed to happen. And so I took that, and anytime we got to the point where we took a rest, instead of sleeping, she was studying, or she was reading, or otherwise doing something that the DM would consider a light activity that was
Yeah.
not sleep. And as far as the Reborn that I'm currently playing, it's the same thing. I have to spend 8 hours doing little to nothing. Technically, I believe I'm supposed to have an inactive state, which is why I normally just sit there and stare at the wall.
Reginald just sleeps. That's all I have to say on that topic. I don't know about y'all.
I think that about well covers it.
All right. So we're going to my topic. So, favorite stereotypes for characters. Example, like the gray bearded wizard old guy, right? So Gandalf, right? Pot smoking hobbit. Um, my favorite stereotype is a gentle giant, like Grog or from Critical Role Season 1. Basically, just a character that is bigger than life, but they're extremely sweet and fragile on the inside. I find that endearing. Um, that's my favorite kind of stereotype when it comes to characters. I always like that whenever I see them somewhere. And I've been recently rewatching Stranger Things, and I feel like I always want to call him the wrong name. Is it Hopper? His name is Hopper. The
Jim
sheriff?
Hopper?
Yes.
Yes.
I feel like Hopper is that. He is capable of
Yes.
great violence, but he is very sweet and kind. Um, and it's something that I noticed because I've always really liked his character, and so I was thinking about that today. As I was watching it, I was like, oh, okay, that's what it is. It's that.
Yeah.
What about y'all?
I think my favorite stereotype is, and y'all are probably gonna laugh at me, the horny bard. And the reason I love the horny bard is actually because of my girlfriend. So she came up with a character that, on the surface level, is your traditional horny bard, flirts with everybody, just wants to get in bed. But he does that not because he actually wants the act of being sexual, but because he doesn't like sleeping alone. He doesn't sleep very well when he's alone. He doesn't actually care if the act happens. He just wants someone there with him. It's a lonely thing. And I like that stereotype simply for that, because it can be turned on its head that way. There can be reasons behind it that they're using it to cover up their own insecurities. They're using it to cover up their own feelings, and I like the idea of that. Now, granted, most of them are just the standard horny bard, which can also just be hilarious when they're trying to seduce a dragon or something. I'm sure everyone has seen that meme of, I seduced the dragon, natural 20. Great, the dragon's a top. And that's funny too, but it's mostly because of my girlfriend circumventing it and changing it to be different than what it is. But one I don't really like, and it might not necessarily be a stereotype, but the most people say that small races can't be a barbarian-esque character. So a kobold or a gnome, you don't see them very often wielding big weapons and being the strong fighter type. They're more often delegated to roles such as rogues or spellcasters. And I don't like that, because I find it completely adorable, the idea of a tiny little kobold running into battle with a battle axe just as big as they are. And there's no reason they can't. As long as they have the strength for it, and or a weapon that fits them for it, there's no reason a small race can't be this strong, tough fighter type. Those are mine.
I honestly, like the kobold, like, you know, I feel like seeing a little kobold in like a mage like robe, like with just his like snout poking out, would be cute as hell. With like a little like staff, just like meh.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, also running into battle with a giant ass fucking great axes is also
Look, let's just be
striking
real
imagery.
here. Let's just be real. In general, kobolds are adorable.
They are.
They are. They are very much. I would say one of my favorite stereotypes is always the rogue with the depressing backstory. I think that's one that everybody always kind of, every time somebody's like plays a rogue, they're like, my family is all dead and I'm seeking revenge. I'm dark and moody because of this event that happened in my life. And it's like, as soon as you hear somebody that goes, yeah, I'm going to play a rogue. And then you go, all right, where's the depressing backstory? Come on, hit it. Hit me with it. It's one of those, like, I feel like you see often is that a rogue always has a depressing backstory.
I feel like that's all 5e characters. Like 90% of them have a depressing backstory.
You're not wrong. A lot of
Yeah.
them do.
It's kind of like a Disney movie. Which parent is dead?
It's Batman, or you get the Batman treatment, and both of them are dead.
Right?
I would say maybe one that I don't really like is the all clerics have to be good. They all have to be lawful and they all have to be good. I feel like clerics can be a little bad. Yeah, can be a little dark nun action. So I feel like that's one that I want something to stray away from. Is there are a lot of gods in the pantheon for 5e, and a lot of them aren't lawful gods. A lot of them are like neutral, and you know.
That's very true. You even got evil gods that you could follow. There's,
I know.
For example, the trickery domain that, like, for example, Tiamat falls under, that you could very well be a cleric to Tiamat and be an evil cleric. It's not one that's utilized very often, and I feel like part of that is because when you think cleric, you think healer.
You think, yeah, good. And I mean, you could still be a healer. You just take on the mindset that a lot of Final Fantasy 14 players have. I hold your life in my hand. Beg for it.
See, and I love that I've actually heard tales of some people making characters that are essentially that. Of, okay, you need heals? Pay me. Okay, you need heals? I don't like you, so you're out of luck. And I love that. Because I feel like that is realistic, because you do have people that would do that.
Yeah. Does your mind, do you have one that you don't like, Erica? We all kind of stated one that we didn't like, so.
I guess like one that I like dwarves, but I don't like the stereotype that dwarves and elves have to hate each other. I don't know. I feel like that's kind of a stereotype that's like, maybe we could just let that one go.
I feel like that one just stems from Lord of the Rings because in Lord of the Rings, the dwarf gives the elf a hard time.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of bleeds into all fantasy media.
Yeah.
I typically don't run that in my games. Like, I might have dwarves give other races a hard time, but it's never exclusively elves. It's usually, you're a human, you're weak. Eh. You're a cat. Eh. You're an elf. You're fancy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if the dwarf is giving everyone crap, then it's fine, but as long as it's not like just the elf, you know what I mean? All the time.
Yeah.
Um I don't know. I feel like a lot of it does come from stuff like that. Like a lot of the stereotypes that you do see in D&D does come from either Lord of the Rings or I want to think there's a couple from Wheel of Time that I can think of. No, not Wheel of Time. Oh my god, what is it called? Dragonlance. You'll see a lot of stereotypes come from Dragonlance, like the dwarf that doesn't like water.
I've actually never heard of that one. But to be fair, I've also never read Dragonlance.
Yeah, there's a dwarf character in there that like fears water, and I've ran into that a couple of times. It's like, but in D&D, this is actually something that like me and the owner of our local game store have talked about. Back in the day during Dragon Magazine, there was actually a mention of dwarves that were almost like pirates, right? Like the world they came from, right? They're not from the world of is I don't want to cross game here, but I'm pretty sure it's called Toril. Isn't that the
Yeah.
planet
I'm pretty
of
sure.
Yeah.
that is supposed to be the main planet for D&D? They came from a different world, and on that world there were dwarves that were seafaring dwarves. And it was something me and him had talked about. How cool would it be is if someone created a campaign setting that was the dwarven world. So all it is dwarves. Mountain dwarves, forest dwarves, dwarves of the air, dwarves in the sea, dwarves, you have your like dwarves in the very, very pits of the darkness. They wouldn't be Duragar because that would be more of this world and specifically Forgotten Realms in particular. Um, you know, but something kind of like that, maybe the dark dwarves on that world, they are different. They've adjusted to the life underground in a different way. I guess like stereotypes that I don't really care for, I guess if they're based in race. That's what I'm trying to get around to. And I love dwarfs, so I'm always defending the dwarfs.
We have anything else on stereotypes?
Don't believe so.
No.
No?
Last one.
All right, it's the last one. This is mine. So I saw this topic on online talking about weapons, and I think it was maybe just like a situation where it was like, they break or whatever. And I was I kind of thought about it more, and thought about kind of other weapons in mainly in 5th edition, because a lot of the other systems that I like to look into, they're more kind of, you can set them in more of the real world, so they have more like realistic like weapons and everything. So like in your like more fantasy tended world, guns in 5th edition, they all have a chance to misfire whenever you roll a 1 or roll a certain number. It just depends on the weapon that it is. I think there's one that's like, it's like a 2 or 3 or something like that. Do you think that other weapons like bows or swords should also maybe have this chance to have some sort of defect whenever you're rolling to attack? Like if you're swinging a sword at something that is heavily armored, Do you feel like there should be a chance for maybe the sword to chip, or the sword to kind of, whenever you hit, the vibrations of the sword, if you miss, could maybe cause it to like fall out of your hand? Or if you roll a certain number on a bow, it maybe the strap snaps or something, and you maybe have to spend a turn to like restring your bow. Kind of just like thoughts. I was thinking about that, and I was like, well, you don't really see that with other weapons, so I just kind of wanted to get the thoughts on that. How, like, what you would think.
I feel like if you wanted to add elements to 5e like that, it would be something that would go back to like Foxfire's topic. It would be more of like a hardcore mode, because it would be more management for everybody, because every time you swing your sword, you're not just swinging your sword to see if you hit and you do damage. Now there's another roll that you have to make to see if it damages your sword or bow. Fill in blank. I'm going to use sword as a general weapon name. So then you're adding rolls to the game, you're adding time to the game.
Well, no, it would be
And
in one roll. So
no,
whenever
what I'm
you
saying
roll,
is, go ahead.
whenever you roll with like the guns, and it's all one roll. It's if
No.
you roll this
Ye-
number, that's
so-
whenever like a misfire would happen.
Yes, with guns it is,
With
but
guns it is, yeah.
I think what Erica is saying is with other weapons, she feels like it would be multiple rolls, which I can understand, because while guns, okay, it misfires, so it jams. Now I have to spend an action to fix it. Well, I'm using my sword cracks. I can't exactly fix that in the middle of battle.
No.
So
You need a
now,
weaponsmith to do that. You have to go back to town.
yeah, so now what do I do? Does it just weaken? Do I use a different dice? Does it just straight up break? Is it just useless? Is that more what you were meaning, Erica?
Yeah, what I mean is like it's this, there are rules in place for misfire when it comes to the gun. There are not rules in place in 5e for how your sword breaks, if it breaks, what's the severity, and also how to get it. I mean, getting it fixed is a DM call. You would have to realistically go to a weaponsmith, because, like Foxfire was saying, you can't whip out something and repair it just right there, because you're going to need metal and heat and everything else. So I feel like realistically, your sword breaking, I don't think I wouldn't do it. Personally, I wouldn't want to play with that. I feel like the gun thing, if your gun jams, it's something that you can, they have a way for you to fix it. Now, if your gun breaks, you have tinkerer's tools, and more than likely, you are trained to fix it yourself. So it's not you having to go to another person to fix your weapon constantly. You have the ability to fix it.
And with that being said, it's not like there aren't some things in place that would allow players to fix their weapons in the field, but whereas a gun is, again, as an example, an action to unjam it, the only other thing that you could realistically do in battle to fix, say, a sword would be the mending spell. And there's a pretty good chance, if you're using a sword in combat, you probably are not a spellcaster. Now, obviously that depends on what you're running, because there are some spellcasters that do use blades, but most likely you're not. And the only other option from that would be if you have a proficiency in, say, smith's tools. And that would just going off of realism, it takes hours to fix a blade that's damaged. You, like Erica said, you need metal, you need immense heat, you need an anvil, you need a strong hammer, and it takes hours of heating the metal, putting the metal in the right place, hammering it back into place, and then sharpening that weapon back to where it was. It takes hours. It's gonna take more than 5 minutes, but if a gun jams, it is, again, just an action. Or even realistically, I have an uncle who is a redneck, because, we're in the South. And he used to take his guns apart to clean them or fix them if something was going on. It would take him an hour at the most to take the gun apart, clean it, and put it back together. It was relatively simple, even though I could not personally take a gun apart like that. He could. And somebody who's trained, that doesn't take that long. And clearing a jam, depending on the severity of the jam, doesn't realistically take that long either. So your time in game would also reflect that. Just similarly to the sword issue. So, yeah. It's just more of a logistic thing. Like Erica was saying. And me personally, I don't like to implement weapon breaking unless special circumstances, like, say the party's going against rust monsters. Then, yes, they are very much in danger of their armor and weapons getting destroyed, just as the nature of the creature. But just normally, I personally don't like to do that, because it adds another level of, honestly, irritation more than anything. Because, well, I'm in the middle of a forest. I'm not proficient in smith's tools. I can't cast mending, nobody in my party can cast mending, and I have a broken sword. I am useless in combat now. Whereas my little gunslinger friends over here like, yeah, I unjammed my gun, I'm good now. And so now the party has to go all the way back to town because, well, our fighter is useless. Kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Whenever I saw it, I was like, okay, well, that would be interesting, kind of just to see like kind of the thought process behind that of like, there's just this one weapon that does have that, and then it's like, your bows don't have the chance for the strings to snap. I mean, if you use a bow long enough, if it's not magical weapons, I think, are a little bit different than like your normal weapons or whatever. I feel like if you had used a bow long enough, there could be a chance for it to snap. I think it's kind of like where, like, obviously if you have like an older sword, like there's a chance for the hilt to be messed up. And I don't know, it was one of those, like, I saw it and I was like, oh, well, that would be interesting, especially for that. Like, I do think bow snapping would be a lot more realistic than like a sword breaking, because obviously like swords are forged and they are multiple pieces of metal that have been hammered together over multiple smithing days or hours. So
I feel like if you wanted to do a hardcore mode, this is something you could add, but I agree with Fox, like your bowstring snapping, that might take you maybe an hour, maybe. So I don't know. I'm not a bow person. I've been bow fishing. It's different than archery. um but because bow fishing isn't using a true bow, it's a compound bow. So it's not the same as what Legolas would use, right? It's different technology, but you stringing up a bowstring would take less time than fixing a sword. I feel like if you wanted to do hardcore mode, this could be something that you add. All weapons can break. Okay, well, then you have you as the DM and the players all agree on what that looks like, how that works, and how they are all to be fixed or can be fixed, or something that you do yourself. I know that in other systems, your gear does break down. It's one of those things. I know in Morkborg Natural 1, your weapon breaks. That's standard. A DCC, you get you roll on the failure table, nat failure, chance your weapon could break, your bowstring snaps, fill in blank, right? And there's protocol for that, and like it has it all right there on the chart. I feel like for 5e it would be something you definitely would have to add to your game. I've never heard of anybody making mechanics for it. I know that I probably wouldn't want to play with it because Dragonheim wouldn't be bad to play with those kind of rules because you don't really you don't travel too far. You're always just maybe a couple hours outside of town where you could get stuff fixed. So it wouldn't be as bad. But if you're in um the Mad Mages dungeon, it's like a mega dungeon that came out years ago for 5e, that one could be a real pain in the ass.
Well, and add to it, it also would depend on the campaign you're in as far as finances as well.
Oh yeah.
So, like the hardcore game I was in, pretty much all of our finances went to healing potions, and we didn't really have much to begin with even before then. So you have to take into consideration that there would be a cost for item repair as well. And in our current campaign in Dragonheim, we get enough gold that I feel like we would be totally fine if we implemented weapon breaking, because we could just easily replace our weapons or get them fixed. But in a campaign where you're not getting as much gold,
Yeah.
it would be difficult to maintain that. It could take you days to earn enough gold to get your weapon repaired, depending on the campaign and how hardcore it is. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but a common person in the world of D&D only makes a couple gold a year.
Yeah.
And I believe most weapons cost around 20 to 25 gold each.
Depends on the weapon.
It does depend on the weapon. I believe daggers are cheaper, but I believe short swords are around 15 to 20 gold. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is off the top of my head.
Well, and then it's also a question of
Oh, you are very off.
I was thinking they weren't that expensive, but
martial weapons, they can go up to 50 gold for a great sword.
Yeah, big sword.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm thinking of martial weapons.
Yeah, short sword is 10. Yeah.
Okay, so
well,
yeah,
I mean, 10 gold still, like, if they're only earning 2 gold a year, that's 5 years worth of gold.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And also, it's another thing to consider, like, most people give magical items within the first, most people get a +1 sword within the first, level 3 to 5. You're going to start getting magical weapons. They're not going to break because that's part of it. And then the whole weapon breakage goes out the window.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you all agree. We're not doing magical weapons. You're not finding +1 swords or that rule of like magical weapons don't break like that. Goes out the window too. And then it's like you can have a +1 sword, maybe it doesn't break as easy, and then there's a whole other list of rules on like if it's a +1 versus a +5 that you have to get into. I mean, it's doable. It's something that you could play with for sure. It's just you'd have to really work the ins and outs of it.
Yeah. And for the average DM, for the average player, I don't feel like that is a big priority. Not that it's not implementable, like Erica said, in a hardcore campaign, that would absolutely be a great implementation.
Mm-hmm.
But
I want to think they have this in Dark Souls, the RPG for Dark Souls. Because I have the RPG, I've never actually got to play it, but I have read through it, and your weapon does have durability on it.
It would make sense.
So you can always look at something like that already has the rules for it, and then implement them in your 5e game.
Magical weapons can still break. It's in the DMG, but they're harder to break than normal weapons. So magical weapons aren't indestructible. I think it just depends on the magical weapon that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't feel like if you had that rule in there, you wouldn't have to discard using magical weapons at all. It would just be harder for them to break.
Yeah, and as they get more powerful, they're even harder to break.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, obviously, if you go up to like a rare or like very rare. My brain is not wanting to work. But yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Well, do we have anything else for this one?
No,
No?
No,
I think that covers it.
All right.
that's about it.
Play your favorite stereotype. I don't know.
Be a horny bard.
Be a horny bard. Seduce that
Be-
dragon.
Be the bard you want to see in the world.
Make
All
sure
right.
before you do that dragon's not a top.
Or maybe you want it to be a top. Who knows? All right. Well, we'll see you next time.
Cast
Goodbye.
reduce on that thing.
Hey, travelers, thank you so much for watching this week's episode. We really hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll like, comment, and subscribe on the YouTubes. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and Apple Music so that way you know when a new episode drops because it'll notify you. Our next episode is going to be on July 19th, and it is going to be the last part of our 5e dice shot. So if you haven't listened to the other parts, make sure that you go and listen to those before you listen to that episode. So yeah, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.